All right, so welcome to what to expect with your accounting integration when using ServiceTitan and QuickBooks. So this presentation today, again, thank you to Service Nation for welcoming our team from Out of the Box Technology as we discuss this integration. A little bit about Out of the Box Technology. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with our services, we are a preferred vendor with Service Nation Alliance. And we're so excited to be here today. We are anything and everything QuickBooks. So what exactly does that mean? We're an elite QuickBooks solution provider as accredited by Intuit, and we're also a certified provider of ServiceTitan. So both of those systems kind of work hand in hand, and that's what we're going to discuss today. But we really service all QuickBooks products, whether it's desktop, online, whichever version you are on, we can help you with that. We work in data services, accounting services, such as recurring bookkeeping, and then training, integration, and support as it relates to all of those areas. So before I introduce our presenters and dive in today, I just have a poll question for you. So the audience, if you can just type in the chat, just kind of getting an idea of who we have on the line today. If you're a bookkeeper, an accountant, a business owner, operations manager, maybe a mix of both, none of the above, feel free to type in if you fit into a different category, just so we can kind of see who we have on the line here. And I'll give that just a second before I introduce my colleague who will be presenting today. So thank you. Brista, who's our presenter, I think you can probably see the chat as well to see who we have on the line here. Some bookkeepers, owners, managers, kind of across the board, which is nice to see kind of a mix in our audience today. So thank you for answering that. So as I mentioned, Brista, she is our presenter today. Brista is the Executive Director of Accounting and Data Services here at Out of the Box Technology. And she is a certified accountant with ServiceTitan. So she received that credit, I believe it was in 2022. It's a newer program, and she's one of the first to achieve that. So we're really excited for her and her knowledge surrounding both of the products, ServiceTitan and QuickBooks. So without further ado, Brista, I'll let you take things away and get started with the presentation.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to join you today to talk about what to expect with that software integration with ServiceTitan and QuickBooks. So excited to bring you the content. We're going to talk first about ServiceTitan versus QuickBooks and what to expect with that, that initial relationship between the two systems. And to help kick this off, it is helpful to know what version of the software you're using, if you're using desktop, online, or other. So if you can drop that in the chat as well, that'll help guide the discussion a little bit as we dive into some of these topics. So thank you.
Yeah, looks like a lot of desktop, users. Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for answering that. And we're going to dive right in and talk about what should be managed in which system. So first, in ServiceTitan, it's a robust system, and we have a lot of stuff going on in there. So the first couple of topics I want to talk about are your projects and the jobs. So with your projects, you have everything related to the project. That first screenshot up in the top right corner, we have everything related to the project. You have your tasks, any financials associated with those, appointments, estimates. Do we have multiple jobs for one project, or multiple appointments or multiple estimates? So we definitely want to make sure that's all being managed within ServiceTitan. And then, the subset of that are the jobs, and we're managing those within ServiceTitan as well. Super important for that piece to maintain in ServiceTitan. QuickBooks, doesn't necessarily have that feature. So we obviously want to manage that within ServiceTitan. We have the dispatching, time spent on jobs, planning your materials, and all of that as it associates with the projects or the jobs. And if we're starting with, we can kind of dive into this a little bit later, but just as an introduction, if we're converting from another system to Service Titan, then we would look at that initial sync between the two systems a little bit differently, because we want to make sure we have everything tracked properly as it, your beginning balances, if you will, with your jobs and your projects. And then as well in Service Titan, we have, as it relates to jobs and projects, now we're talking about invoicing, customer payments, technician hours. Those invoices, once a job is completed, then you can create those invoices. You can collect customer payments, and managing all of that within Service Titan will allow you to have a very good picture of your customer balances as it relates to jobs and to their customer record itself. So then that way, when it does end up syncing into QuickBooks, we have accurate balances in there as well. So invoicing once jobs are complete, payments and proper payment records. We'll go into some of the common mistakes, or common things that I have seen actually with some of the invoicing or the payments. Just making sure that this is all managed properly within Service Titan. And then as well, the technician hours. So you can do this by job and by business unit. And it gives you another good level of visibility into what's going on with your business. Now, which ones do actually sync with QuickBooks? We talk about jobs and projects and payments and invoices and technician hours and all of that fun stuff. So syncing with QuickBooks, we have mainly the invoices and customer payments. A lot of you use desktop. So the syncing, what does sync between desktop and QuickBooks, QuickBooks Online does look a little bit different. But when we talk about syncing, the syncing part of it with QuickBooks, your jobs must be closed in order for the invoices to be ready to sync from Service Titan to QuickBooks. We don't want to recognize that revenue from the job until the job's actually completed, which is why those invoices can't be created until the job's actually marked complete. And for them to be ready to do the sync between Service Titan and QuickBooks, we have to have an invoice available, and the invoice has to be closed. Then with the customer payments, when that is syncing, or when we have it ready to sync, the deposits can be synced prior to a job being done. The payment, the way that the payments are set up, and we'll talk about setup as well, because with a good integration comes a really good setup, and it sets you up for success in your accounting software. Setting up those customer payments properly will also allow that information to come into QuickBooks properly as well and apply to those customer records. And as it syncs over, we will talk about your undeposited funds account and bank deposits and how all of that works together. But just high level invoices and customer payments, that obviously is really important for your, for your profit and loss. What money have you made, and what deposits do you have? So getting these set up and how they sync into QuickBooks is really important, and we'll dive more into that later. Okay, and then what doesn't sync with QuickBooks, there's a lot of other modules available within Service Titan. Things that don't sync is the payroll, the Service Titan payroll. That's rather new. And then we have your payables. This only syncs with desktop. It does not sync with QuickBooks. So, most of you on desktop have this feature or have this feature available. However, with that payables function, you do have to have that purchasing or inventory module for this feature. And again, setup is super important for that purchasing or inventory module for the payables item to work properly with that sync. And then your timesheets for for your time, the time records for each of your jobs. So that also does not sync over. And then any general overhead expenses not tracked in Service Titan. So we've got, anything else that is in QuickBooks won't sync backwards into Service Titan. So to get a full picture of your financials that sync with the invoices and the payments sending over and payables, if it applies, that sync into QuickBooks is really important for that really good picture of where your business is actually at. And then as far as anything else managed, sales tax, that's one of those things where we want to make a decision. You can manage sales tax within Service Titan, and you would set up the tax zones as it shows down there at the bottom. You can set up your tax zones within QuickBooks, and that can sync over into QuickBooks, but make sure that is managed in Service Titan. Or you can turn on the automatic sales tax within QuickBooks itself, and you can turn on that module, but then manage the sales tax within QuickBooks. When we get into a little bit of a situation is when you decide to try to manage it in both places. So make a decision where you want that managed as far as the sales tax rates and the zones within Service Titan or the automatic sales tax within QuickBooks, QuickBooks Online. Then you want to make sure that you have made that decision and we're not going back and forth, because then we can get a lot of crossing wires, and we don't want that to happen, especially as we're reporting sales tax to the state and everything else. So the sync will be different with your QBO and desktop as far as what items would come over, but super important to come up with that decision from right off the bat, where you want to be managing that. So so that one can be managed in either place. Just make a decision beforehand. And then we talk about inventory management. So mentioned the setup and how important that is within Service Titan. But you also, before we talk about turning on that inventory module within Service Titan, we want to talk about the two different ways to manage your inventory. So there's two different ways that you can be tracking your inventory. Your perpetual inventory. So every purchase, every sale of every item, that's going to be tracked. And Service Titan has a module, as mentioned before, to track this. And you can be as specific as what's on a truck. What inventory do I have on each truck? And it's going to, the pros and cons of this, with the perpetual, you're going to be very accurate. You're going to have a count real time of what, as long as it's being kept up with what you're purchasing, what you're selling, or what you're using. So it's accurate and real time. At the other side of that is it's time consuming to keep up with it, and you want to make sure that it is accurate. So it does take a lot of time to keep track of everything, and it's also harder to correct should we find any mistakes or any issues with pricing or counting, just to double check your inventory. So perpetual, that's one thing to consider with your inventory. Periodic is counting as needed, and you would keep track of that outside of Service Titan. That does, or outside of QuickBooks. That does mean that, that might be tracking on a spreadsheet. So your pros and cons here is within your system, within Service Titan or within QuickBooks, it's going to be a little bit easier, a little bit quicker, but it is only going to be, your inventory valuation will only be as accurate as often as you do it. So whether that means you're counting from, counting at the end of each month, you're counting at the end of the year, that adjustment may go up and down based on how often you do your count. So the periodic versus perpetual inventory is another decision that you would have to make. You can track it within Service Titan, And then this proper setup so that it'll sync into QuickBooks correctly is also very, very valuable. And we're going to dive into that here soon. The other part of this too is on the management side. Once you've made that decision for perpetual versus periodic, just staying on top of perpetual for sure, staying on top of that management of your items within your price book and getting that price book set up accurately.
Excellent. Thank you, Brista. Well, I think we've hit a breaking point here in our first segment. So I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions. Again, you can put those questions in the chat, or as we segue to new topics, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask a question. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to welcome our friend and partner from Service Titan, JP Powell, is on the line, and she's here to just offer support if you all have any specific questions about Service Titan. Again, Brista is very knowledgeable and certified in the product, but we also thought it would just be great to have someone from Service Titan represented, as well as we talk about their product, just to kind of bring it full circle. So I'll give just a second. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone has anything about the inventory or the syncing or anything that Brista's touched on so far, feel free to speak up. Otherwise, we will also have time at the end as well as you kind of digest this if anything comes up. So like I said, I don't see anything. So Brista, we'll power right ahead.
All right. So we talked about what to manage where, Service Titan versus QuickBooks. Now we're going to talk about the relationship between the two. So Service Titan and QuickBooks, and we're going to take a look at that setup. So the setup is super, I don't think I can say it enough. It is super important for that integration to work properly and for it to work for you in your accounting software. So within your price book, we have materials, we have services, we have equipment. And when you're adding these items, you can see that there are different things that need to be added for these, obviously, for them to be selected for an invoice. The main thing here, when we're talking about the setup between QuickBooks, or rather Service Titan and QuickBooks, we have general ledger accounts to choose from. So that would be selected from your chart of accounts from your QuickBooks file. So we would want to make sure that that is selected and set up properly. So having your chart of accounts nailed down, at least for these items that you're entering, is going to help with that syncing process. If there is a missing GL account or anything as it relates to how it syncs over, that missing GL account or missing business unit, if you're matching business units, that all, business units would equate to classes. Those will flag it and will not allow it to be sent over. So when we're talking about your general ledger account, an income account, your inventory account, however we need to have it mapped based on the item that you're setting up, that's going to be very, very important for you to take, pay super close attention to that. So then that way that GL account is selected properly. What you can see in these images here, we have a couple of examples for the name, the code, the company as it relates, category as it relates to the category that item falls under. We can be very specific. We have our description. We have our vendor when we talk about the payables piece of it. So setting up that primary vendor, the cost that it is through that particular vendor. And then you can see there that we have an expense account mapped. So when we sell the item, the expense account that it will be mapped to as it syncs over. And this particular example here is all with that inventory module turned on and that purchasing module turned on. So having that expense account mapped, having the income account when they purchase the material, we have to use the material for the job, we have an income account matched. And the services in particular, you're selling a service. And so we want to make sure we have that income account mapped properly and the correct account for that type of service. So that mapping and that setup we can do in bulk with an Excel spreadsheet. We can do it in bulk with an upload, but having everything mapped properly for the, outside of the GL accounts. But now we're talking about vendors. We're talking about the cost that you can enter in here, and having all the codes set up properly, and your business units. Because if we're going to track classes within your accounting software, then we want to make sure we have the business unit set up properly. So then that can also be mapped as it syncs over into QuickBooks. Once these items are set up, materials, services, equipment, the suggestion here from experience would be not to change anything. If you have to change something, then make sure you are going through every single piece of that within ServiceTitan and within QuickBooks to make sure that that sync isn't upset then with that same item that you used, or with that same service that you're creating within ServiceTitan and sending over into QuickBooks. If you have a new revenue account to map, that's perfectly fine. And we'll just have to make sure, or what we would suggest for you is to make sure that each piece, you've got your material, you've got your services, you've got the income account mapped to the item within QuickBooks properly. And then that when you do make that change, if it does happen, we're not in a, that will never happen. There is going to be that situation where you might have to adjust a couple of things, but just make sure that you have, every piece addressed before you make that change completely. Maybe you do one test or something to make sure that you have all the processes in place and all of the items adjusted that you need to. Remapping, inactivating, removing any items that you need to within QuickBooks so that you don't have that confusion. That's also another way to go about doing that. So with that, the setup is super important. As mentioned before, I know I've said it already many times, but also if there is ever a change that needs to be made, that is just as important as the setup, because it does then affect how everything syncs over. And it's not only just related to the price book, but if we look at, business units on the next slide, we'll have, that setup as well is also important. If you're looking to track those kinds of things within QuickBooks and, with these larger, with your larger businesses, we do have different business units that we want to track. In our example here, we have different electrical business units, and then we can map that to the business units within ServiceTitan. So when it does sync over into QuickBooks, we've got it already set up. Now, those classes will need to be set up in QuickBooks. So then that way we can map all those to the correct one. And we've got all the, everything as far as the characters and that item, those items are all set up properly. Then it can be synced and we won't have any flags when you try to sync. So the most frustrating thing when trying to sync ServiceTitan can be when that little error pops up and it's maybe I forgot to add an S at the end of a word or something to make sure that it's all mapped properly. So the setup then with the business units is just as important if you want to keep that tracking within QuickBooks. And within the business units, the screenshot on the right there shows you where you would map that business unit within the syncing between QuickBooks. So there is a little tab there called QuickBooks, and you can go down to that QuickBooks class and enter in that class that you want to map each of those business units to. So the business units being super valuable within ServiceTitan will then, when you sync it over and your expenses, as your overhead expenses, as they're coming into QuickBooks and you're entering them into QuickBooks, then you're classing those as well, assigning a class to each of those. And then you have a, really good picture of what your business units are doing as it's being synced over from ServiceTitan. Then for our payment types, in this example here, we have a lot of different payment types. Nowadays there are many ways to get payment. But when you're setting those up, there's different ways that we can set these up to export. So obviously the ones that were, ACH, cash, check, credit card, those are going to be coming over as a payment. And the payment, when it exports, you can select where you want that to go to. In our example here, and one of the things that I would suggest, if you have the bandwidth to do so, is use that undeposited funds account. That helps you track, did I collect the payment, number one? Number two, did the money get deposited to my bank account? I think that's a very valuable piece of information to have. So tracking that the payments with an undeposited funds account rather than depositing it directly to the bank account will help you track it. That does require some undeposited funds management, and we will hit on that later. But that is a very good way for checks and balances between payments you're collecting and recording versus what's being deposited to my bank account. So setting up the payment types, if it's going to be exported as a payment, if it's going to be exported as a journal entry, if we're going to export a refund as a refund, those types of setups will also be important as it's being synced into QuickBooks. With your payment types, we have the ones that you're receiving the money, but then you also want to have a refund type, or a payment type for a refund. And within your payment types, you can select, is it going to be a check refund? That's going to clear the bank differently than maybe a credit card refund. So you can set up refunds in different ways. You know, am I refunding it by a check? And you can select that and how it's being exported. Or you're refunding on a credit card with whatever processor you're using, we can select that credit card refund. And then that when that syncs over into QuickBooks, then that will put it into the proper place. Whether it is an undeposited funds account, or we're going to export it as a journal entry and it's going to go into a refunds clearing, or for example. So that setup is valuable, very useful for it to be synced over into QuickBooks properly. And then we can talk about that undeposited funds management here in just a little bit. Some common mistakes that we have seen as we've been working with customers in Service Titan. Inventory versus non-inventory. We have materials and we have services, we have equipment. Services, there's a little toggle button that is, it says is inventory. When you have that turned on, then it's obviously going to be tracked as inventory. And that would be applicable to if you have the purchasing or inventory module, we definitely want to be using that for that perpetual tracking and have that turned on. When that's turned on, those items will sync into QuickBooks. So having that turned on or off based on what you're looking to do within your QuickBooks software or within Service Titan, that is just one of those simple things to make sure that if you want to be tracking inventory, you've got it turned on. And then if you are not looking to track inventory, it's turned off. So even just with my experience, it was just as simple as clicking the button to make sure we've got it set up properly because we wanted it to be tracked as inventory. With our business units, kind of what we touched on before, we aren't setting it up properly to be matching a class that's already set up in QuickBooks. So that class setup in QuickBooks does have to be done on that side. So then when it maps over from your business unit and you are mapping it, then it is a seamless integration and it's already recognizing that you have those classes set up. So making sure that your characters are in there properly, however we have it typed in QuickBooks, and then how we have it set up in Service Titan. So characters are important there when it's trying to match those up as you export. Payment methods. I've already talked about this just a little bit, but we have them not mapped properly or even set up properly. So all of these are going back to that setup and how things are started. So if we have our payment methods mapped properly, we have it mapped to the right account when we want to map that integration, whether it's undeposited funds or if you choose to do your bank account, that's fine. How you have it mapped, or you select a journal entry and then we don't have everything else mapped on the other side to get the journal entry over properly, or anything else in the setup piece of it for those items. But with those things, it really does come back to how did you set it up? And that's where we have the awesome team at Service Titan to help do that. And and just make sure that everything runs seamless for you in that integration between ServiceTitan and QuickBooks. And then what to sync. So we talked about what to be managed and what to sync a little bit ago. The customer payments and the invoices, including that inventory, those are what you want to sync. And then if applicable, like we talked about before, we have that payables module that if you're using it, that can be synced to QuickBooks Desktop only. On your invoices, that's again, going back to the setup. So when the invoices are sent over, we have our services coming over at the correct rates, mapped to the proper items. And then the same thing with the inventory, those materials will also sync over. And then if you're tracking perpetual inventory, then that will also keep an inventory count in QuickBooks as well. So having those invoices syncing over with the inventory, it's again, all back to that setup. Customer payments. So with the customer payments, if you're going to receive payments just outside of the credit card collection, whatever processor you're using, cash, check, Venmo, Zelle, or anything like that, making sure that those are being applied to the invoices properly, and collecting those payments or recording those payments as they're collected, not necessarily waiting until, oh, now my invoice is posted, so now I'm going to apply the payment that I received to my bank account a week ago, or, however that looks, whatever the delay is there. You want to make sure that you're recording those payments as you get them and as they're being deposited to the bank account. Some of them may be deposits on the jobs, but we want to make sure we have those in there properly. So then when you go to reconcile your bank account on the QuickBooks side, we then have proper deposits and proper deposit records. Now, why we want to sync these over for your invoices and customer payments. We want to make sure that our AR is being tracked properly. So double check. We'll talk about a little bit about separation of duties and who needs to do what and where. If you have your office manager and your operations person managing ServiceTitan, and then we sync into QuickBooks, then you have your bookkeeper, your accountant managing within QuickBooks, then you have a really good double check as far as the data. Are we managing ServiceTitan properly? Are we syncing and then managing QuickBooks properly? And you have a really good checks and balances with your customers as well, your customer records as well. So having that sync over. And then when you have those items within QuickBooks, then like I said before, you have a really good financial picture of your entire business, not just the money, the jobs that you're doing and the materials you're having to purchase and the time spent, but then you have everything else. You have that larger picture within QuickBooks. So that's why any of that data that's being managed within ServiceTitan, we want to get into QuickBooks as long as it syncs. Some of it I mentioned does not sync into QuickBooks, but we can still track those things within ServiceTitan. But it's, when we're looking at financial data, that those types of things are customer payments, invoices, and payables, if you can, getting that into QuickBooks. And then you don't have to do it twice. And it's syncing over into the system, into QuickBooks.
Krista, May I have a question?
Sure.
My name is Kim Martin, and I actually am a coach for Service Nation Alliance. And I'm helping all the some of the members through their financials. And I did a month-end process, and this is presentation. And this is one thing that I did talk to people about month-end close, making sure your AR balances in both your systems. And you may do this later, but is there a quick you can show how to find those two reports so people know that they match from QuickBooks into ServiceTitan, or you can step on that later?
Yeah, we can discuss that later. I don't have any images available for that, but we can kind of walk through it. And JP, if you want to walk through the ServiceTitan side, I can walk through it on the QuickBooks side. There's just a couple of reports that, like you said, it's just a couple of reports that we do compare to make sure that that data is coming over from one system to the other.
Okay.
So yeah, we can absolutely talk about that. I have a little bit that I'll touch on accounts receivables actually here in just a couple slides. So I'll throw that in there with it too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So then behind the scenes, when we're syncing the information, I talk about customer payments and invoices and payables. We also have the customers that are being synced over, and then the vendors with that one particular module when we turn it on. When you sync for the first time, when you sync invoices over or customer records with those invoices, especially within desktop, there is a customer key that's created. And when you export that information, that customer key is created, then you have that connection with the customer between the two systems. And it's important that the name will remain the same in QuickBooks. So, you have the same spaces, you have the same characters for that record, that customer record, to maintain their proper balances, if you will, within the two systems. So that first sync, once you sync that one particular customer over, we want to make sure that information, as far as the name, stays the same. People move around, but if you're going to continue to work with that same customer, that the name can remain the same. And then that way the customer balance will still maintain itself as other things may change. If not, then you have the potential to have a customer record that is duplicated. So, we may have John Smith, but one of them may have an extra space, or one of them may have a comma, or, something like that. So maintaining those customer records and making sure that those don't change is also important, because we don't want to have any duplicate records or have to export an invoice twice, or we miss an export, or whatever that looks like, if there is a difference in the customer name once it's done. Once you can update the name and it will work, just keep an eye on when when you do that sync from the change, that it's it's still maintaining itself, the record itself. Okay. And then here's where we're going to talk about those accounts receivable. So we want to watch those closely. And just like was mentioned earlier with that month-end close, that's a valuable part of your month-end close, is looking at the account receivable in ServiceTitan, and then looking at your accounts receivable in QuickBooks. So within ServiceTitan, there is a report, an accounts receivable report that can be run, and you can change the date range just like you can in QuickBooks. So I would run that accounts receivable report within ServiceTitan, and then your accounts receivable summary, aging summary, within QuickBooks. And then those are the two that we compare when we're doing a month end for ServiceTitan, or for clients that use ServiceTitan. We use both of those reports and compare those. So then that allows us every month to watch those accounts receivable balances closely and make sure that we have everything accurate. Like I'd mentioned before, if we have one person living in ServiceTitan, we have another bookkeeper, accountant, somebody keeping those records within QuickBooks, that is watching those two reports. Whoever's going to be tying that out, that's a very, very good separation of duties, and a very, very good double check to have there. When we talk about messy AR, if we've got duplicate payment records, maybe somebody is situation I've seen before. So just for an example, and we'll talk about this here, it's on the next slide, but if you have duplicate payments, somebody is doing the payment records within QuickBooks, but then they're also being managed in ServiceTitan, we're going to have a little bit of a messy AR when it does all sync over. So that's where comparing the two reports can also come in handy, is to see if there's any duplication of work, which with the sync that we want, that'll help us avoid the duplication of work, but, maybe, just something to keep an eye on. Needs to be real time. So make sure that you have, if you're going to run an AR report as of yesterday, all the data that is in ServiceTitan is also in QuickBooks, so you can compare apples to apples. And I'm looking at my AR report from yesterday in ServiceTitan, and also my AR report from yesterday within QuickBooks. So make sure that's another just quick review to do before you start comparing your reports, is to make sure that the data from Service Titan has been synced and is in QuickBooks. So then that way you can do that comparison. So in Service Titan, as it relates to accounts receivable, as mentioned before, invoices and payments within Service Titan. Proper record keeping within Service Titan for your invoices and payments will then relate to the deposits and matching bank deposits within QuickBooks. So proper records in Service Titan will allow that bookkeeper or the accountant to live in QuickBooks, and we can make deposits that match the bank deposits in QuickBooks. And that again ties into that undeposited funds tracking, where we look at that account and we've got our payment syncing over as undeposited funds. And then I've batched, if you take 5 checks to the bank at once, or you have a credit card processor that batches 5 credit card payments at once, you've got that batch that you can create from your undeposited funds account and then create those deposits within QuickBooks. Some common mistakes that we have seen, or I have seen as I've been assisting clients within Service Titan: recording payments in bulk. So your client pays you $1,000 today, then $1,000 in a week, and then $1,000 in a week after that. And you record, somebody, not pointing any fingers, somebody records a $3,000 payment within Service Titan because they paid you $3,000 and it's all going to go to the bank anyway. But then what we miss is that $1,000 payment that you deposited today, that $1,000 payment that you deposited a week from now. So recording payments in bulk, while it might save you time on the Service Titan side, it does not save time in the QuickBooks side. So making sure that those payment records are accurate and you are recording them as you receive them for that customer. Then if we need to do an adjustment invoice, we need to do a credit on an account. You've completed the job, you have the invoice created, it's been exported into the QuickBooks software, but we need to create a credit, or we need to refund the customer, or the invoice is completed, they haven't paid, you need to create a credit for that invoice. And that gets maintained in QuickBooks because that is your financial software. And I want to record that adjustment, or the credit memo in QuickBooks as it's called. I want to record that in QuickBooks, but then you don't do anything in Service Titan on an adjustment invoice to reconcile that accounts receivable. So getting that adjustment invoice in Service Titan properly will then, when you sync, will allow you to bring that information into QuickBooks. And then you still have your front end office admin person, Service Titan guru within the office doing those things. Then they have an accurate customer balance. And then as it syncs over, then your bookkeeper, accountant, QuickBooks guru will have an accurate customer balance as well in QuickBooks, and we don't have to do a back and forth. So those are the two main things that we see with invoicing or recording payments, making sure it's a 1-for-1 thing. We're not recording $3,000 instead of 3 $1,000 payments, and then getting that adjustment in there properly. And then as we talk about payables, as mentioned before, it does sync with QuickBooks Desktop only. And this relates to your inventory or payables module. So that does need to be set up. And going back to that setup part of it, that is super, super important for that export and for all those items to be entered properly. So then that way, when it does sync over into QuickBooks Desktop, if you do use this item, that setup is really important.
Krista, thank you so much. I'm going to give you a second to maybe take a drink of water and catch your breath. This is a lot of really, honestly, excellent information and training. So I have a couple questions, and I don't know if now would be a good time to further talk to Kim's question. But one thing that has come across is if you could go over the proper way to set up and do a customer refund or partial customer refund. Maybe is it best to set this up as a separate payment type? And I know JP from Service Titan, she sent in the chat a link as a resource for how to kind of work through that, but I didn't know if that was something either of you, Brista or JP, wanted to just talk through as well. Or how easy, I don't want to put you on the spot to go through and do like a mini demo, but if that's something you could talk to.
Yeah, JP, I'll defer to you since if you're wanting to answer that one, which you talked about the automated refund workflow, which I think is a great feature to have. So JP, if you want to answer to that, I'll turn it over to you.
That sounds great. Give me just 1 second while I get this pulled up in my practice account. And then I'll share my screen and well, let me clarify actually, Jeff, I believe you're who asked the question. Did you want to see how to set up the automated refund workflows? So the process within Service Titan that allows you to click one single button and then it walks you through the refund process? Or were you wanting to see how to do the manual version of that? You can either come off mute or just type into the chat.
I'm struggling with the manual, so I guess let's take a look at the automatic.
Okay, awesome. So the automated refund workflow is, let's see if I can.
See if I can stop sharing, JP, and then maybe you can share yours.
Sounds good. All right, my screen is loading. Everyone should be able to see my Service Titan payment collections.
Yep.
All right, so within settings in the top right corner, the gear icon, and then payment collections, we have 3 really awesome sections. We have the auto apply rules, which we're not going to talk about right now, but you should check them out. And then the automated refund workflow. This, well, it's hooked to a practice QuickBooks account, so just kind of ignore these GL accounts here, but this is going to be where you set up the automated refund workflow that will then walk you through exactly what is going on with your refund, and it'll create the adjustment invoice for you. Setting this up looks like you have 2 sections. So we have the assigned tasks section and the payment type section. I always suggest just clicking use Service Titan's default and it'll just create a new task for you. And same thing here, it will create new payment types for you. And then your GL accounts, you just assign whichever GL account you would want that to go to. Typically it's a contra revenue account. I guess in this instance, I decided on my discounts contra revenue account. And for credit card refunds, we want that to go to undeposited funds, which Brista touched on earlier. Obviously, we're going to want to be using that actively if we're going to map something to it. And then if it's a check, it would go to a liability account. The document I put in the chat will walk you through this step by step. Do you want to see this like in action? Like what it would look like to actually go through the process of doing a refund once you have this set up?
Yes, please.
That would be great.
Fantastic. So this is my test account. It is bananas, so do not judge me. These are not real. I do not export from this. Oh, see, I don't even have any payments in here. I do somewhere. I apologize, I wasn't set up for this. We got one right here. Oh, this is already a refund. We'll do this one. Okay, so once you have it set up, every payment will have this cool little circle here. And when you hover over it, it says refund. If you have Service Titan payments, you already see it, but it'll give you a different situation. So when we click on that, we have this handy dandy flyout. We have 4 options. Ignore other unless you're feeling real spicy and you want to make your own adjustment invoice. If you hover over the question mark for each of these, it'll explain it to you. But the way I like to remember it is the top 2, you are giving back, or you're reducing your revenue and you're giving the customer dollars, right? Because those are 2 very separate things. And then the bottom 2 options, you are just giving dollars back. So, you know, if you do a deposit on a canceled job, obviously you have no revenue to reduce. So you select whichever one is applicable. And like I said, you can always hover over the question mark. You decide how much you're going to be refunding. Let's say I'm going to refund $50, and you could do a percentage or a dollar amount. You can also refund a single invoice item. And then you decide how you're going to give the money back. Am I going to cut a check in my accounting software? Am I going to process this outside of ServiceTitan in my credit card processor? Or if you have ServiceTitan payments, you'd have a third option for processing the credit card refund within ServiceTitan. We click save. ServiceTitan says, okay, cool. I'm glad you want to do a refund. Just double check in. We're going to have a negative payment. I want you to be aware. And we're going to have a negative invoice. And then you have the option of adding a memo for your invoice, you know, like my tech walked through their house with muddy boots, so I'm paying to wash their rug or whatever. You could do the same thing with your payment. And if you need to adjust your refund date, you can do that right here. So we click save. ServiceTitan's like, okay, just one more time. Before we go through this whole thing, I just want you to make sure this is correct. We look at it again. Yes, that's totally correct. And we select process refund. Now ServiceTitan created my refund invoice for me. We'll see we have partially refunded here. And that refund invoice lives at the bottom where all the adjustment invoices live. You'll see I've got my negative payment. I've got my negative task. And I just export it like normal. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. What questions are coming up?
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
When I can understand this part, I didn't realize it would automatically do the refund invoice. But when it goes into my QuickBooks Online, I don't know what we have, if I have it set up wrong, but it goes into a journal entry in QuickBooks Online, and it just is never smooth. Like if I have to cut a check or something, I'm missing something.
You're not actually. You're not missing anything. That is the way we have to export this negative payment. It goes over as a journal entry specifically to QBO. And then you have to manually go in and apply payments and cut the check. And you make sure you cut the check from the appropriate account that's listed in this JE. So you are doing it correctly. I can put a resource in the Zoom chat in a minute on, I think I have a resource on that, on the steps once a refund is over in QuickBooks, what you have to do to get that taken care of.
That would be great. I know, like I can't remember which one is easier, the credit card or the check, because I don't have to do it a whole lot, but sometimes I would have to undo the journal entry in QuickBooks just to get it to look right. So okay, I'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Yeah, now I'm pretty sure I made a resource on that. If I didn't, I'll put that in the chat as well, if I can't find it, but we will absolutely get something out to you.
Perfect,
if
thank
not
you.
now, then later. You're welcome. Any other questions before I stop sharing my screen?
Thank you so much, Judy. That was really great to dive in there. Thank you.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'll pull up our presentation. We're gonna head to our next section about the benefits and opportunities of this integration. So let me share this here. And Brista, you can continue on.
Yeah, so Now that we've talked about how the two communicate together and the, working in ServiceTitan versus working in QuickBooks and how they can work together well, now we're going to discuss the benefits and opportunities of that integration as it relates to ServiceTitan and QuickBooks. So we've talked about it before, but your accuracy as it relates to your customer records and your payments and bank deposits and managing the customer records properly within ServiceTitan, invoicing, payments, refunds that we just touched on. And as they sync into QuickBooks, going back to that month-end close procedure where we're talking about your AR within ServiceTitan and your AR within QuickBooks. So those records are, important to keep up with in both places, and we have those checks and balances. As far as when it relates to your payments and bank deposits, you have your payment records that are happening within ServiceTitan, and you're creating those payment records, and then we're syncing them into QuickBooks with that undeposited funds account, managing that undeposited funds account, and creating those bank deposits within QuickBooks. So when you get to that month-end reconciliation with your bank account, you have all the accurate information there that you need in order for that reconciliation to go very smoothly. Then when we talk about payables, the accuracy there, you've got what you're managing within ServiceTitan. And then as it syncs over into QuickBooks, you have that double check once again. So a lot of that, when we're talking about syncing between one system and another, there's multiple ways to do that double check, which is super beneficial for accurate financials. And then we talk about materials tracking, and that as it relates to having that inventory or payables module turned on, and having everything tracked within ServiceTitan, having that price book set up properly, and then it'll sync into QuickBooks, and you have that double check there as well. And like I said before, and as I've mentioned several times, this is all dependent on that proper setup and having those automated workflows, kind of what JP was talking about. That's also going to be very valuable to you, a little bit of time saver there. So then that way everything is syncing over and you've got accurate data in both systems. And then with that undeposited funds management. So when those payments sync over from ServiceTitan and we have them mapped to that undeposited funds GL account, that's put into that undeposited funds account within QuickBooks. And we want to regularly review this list. So when you're creating your bank deposit in QuickBooks, it should be coming from the payment synced over from ServiceTitan. So accurate payment records will sync into QuickBooks in that undeposited funds account and allow you to have accurate deposit records within QuickBooks. So when you're doing your month-end close, just like, mentioned several times, that month-end close, this is another part of the process. Not only are you checking your AR report, but we're also checking that undeposited funds account within QuickBooks. Your payment records and your AR records match in both systems. So now with that undeposited funds management, then you're reconciling, did all the money make it to the bank account? There might be a little bit of a delay as it relates to credit card payments. We have a little bit of time between when you collect the payment in your credit card system and when it gets deposited to the bank account. So there is that piece of it, but it does allow for your double check. Is what is sitting in my undeposited funds account, is that what is truly outstanding? Is it just credit cards from the last couple of days that haven't been deposited? Is it a check that maybe got stuck in my wallet and I forgot to take it to the bank, or, how it got stuck in my desk drawer, wherever checks get lost these days. But that management of that account will help you track that revenue that you have being deposited into your bank account. Not only is the payment record there for AR purposes, but then we've got the next step of it, which is taking it from the job, collecting the payment on the job to depositing it into the bank account. Some common mistakes that we see with these integrations and with the deposit piece of it. Double counting revenue from your bank feed. Now, this is, you have bank feeds turned on, whether that's in QuickBooks Desktop or within QuickBooks Online. Bank feeds are more of a common feature within QuickBooks Online, and I know some of you do use that. When the banks are connected and you have a deposit into your bank feed, that should be grouped to and matched to a deposit. Now, again, this is just as it relates to a bank feed. When you see that deposit in your bank feed and you're counting it as revenue rather than grouping it to a deposit, then we're double counting revenue because we're recognizing the sale itself along with on an accrual basis. We've got the, the invoice in there as well. If there are any missing components of a deposit, so you collect a credit card, they take the fees out and then deposit it to your bank account. So we want to make sure that we're getting those fees recognized properly. And then that way on your financials as well, we've got, your income from the job itself. Then we've got the fees that are being taken out. Not all credit card companies operate that way, but if there are any other components of that deposit, do you have a refund in there that, if you're refunding a credit card, it may be grouped into that deposit. If there's a payment record that you're missing, we forgot to do it in Service Titan, and we don't have that, we don't have that record synced over into QuickBooks. You may catch it on a month-end your month-end process, but if you're working the deposits regularly, you'll catch it beforehand, which will then help you tie out your AR as well. So you'll be able to tie out AR, you'll be able to create that payment record that is needed, and then everybody's nice and happy at the end of the month. And with that separation of duties, we've got people that live in Service Titan, your managers, your owners, your techs, your people that do the work within Service Titan. And then we have people that do the work in QuickBooks. We have your bookkeeper, your accountant, your CPA. That right there, we've talked about the double checks and the proper setup and all of those things, and syncing the two systems, having one person doing the front end system, and then having another person doing the bookkeeping, the QuickBooks, your financial system. Those double checks that we've talked about a lot. This having the separation with the people as well, that will also help keep everything nice and neat and tidy. And if we have an issue with one system, and we notice it in another system, then you can, if that may be a process change that needs to happen, or, it's just another oopsies, I forgot, but then we correct the mistake, or, whatever that looks like. There's just a really good separation there, and then a really good double check. Not only is the month end a good double check for, the financial side, and you're closing your books and you're doing all the double checks that way, but the double checks between the two systems is also a very valuable piece of your business. And then when we talk about the syncing, it is a few clicks to sync. It's a manual process, but it keeps you involved. So anything that, if you're syncing from Service Titan, hey, I need to do my financials, I need you to sync the information over. You have that communication that way. Any error messages when you are syncing, we want to make sure that we address those as they come up to keep everything matching. We talk about that, the communication between the two and making the other. And if there is an error message, there is, you have a pending export report. And if we look at that and address those error messages, remap what needs to be remapped. That's a common one that I see, where we need to remap something, or a payment type isn't set up properly. So it goes back to the setup, and addressing those as they come up, rather than doing everything but the item that's causing the problem. Addressing those messages will help keep everything in sync. And then again, goes back to that month-end process that then becomes a little bit smoother. With those syncs, the sync that does happen manually, yes, it's a couple clicks, and you want to make sure you get all the data over there, but it also eliminates duplicate entry within QuickBooks. So if you have one person doing the entering of the invoices and the payments within Service Titan, we sync it over. We don't have to enter anything in QuickBooks. We have stuff that we can match it to and stuff to validate.
Okay, well, we've come to the end of this section. So I just wanted to open it up again. If anyone has a question, you can chat it over or just unmute yourself. And we'd love to hear any questions you have, or if there's anything else maybe that you wanted to see I think that was a really helpful demonstration. So I'll give that just a second here if anyone has a question before we move on.
Yes, this is Kim again. I'd like to ask and go back on the bank feeds. Wouldn't it be best just to have bank feeds turned off so you wouldn't have the duplicate, or when would you use bank feeds when you're
Yeah.
integrated?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I see bank feeds more common in QuickBooks Online than I do in QuickBooks Desktop. So having them turned off does eliminate the possibility of that duplicate entry or duplicating your revenue as it comes into the bank. So yes, that is completely up to, you know, however you decide to do that from the business standpoint and the financial standpoint. Manual entry of other expenses in QuickBooks, and then you rely on that integration to create the invoices and the payment records and creating those deposits. Absolutely. So it's just, you know, weighing the pros and cons, just like we do with the other processes in place, weighing the pros and cons of having bank feeds turned on or bank feeds turned off. And like I said, you know, desktop, that's not a common thing within desktop. So most of you may not even have that issue. Within QuickBooks Online, it is a little bit more common. And a lot of the Service Titan clients that we have do use QuickBooks Online. So it is something that we run into most often, but with those of you using desktop, you may not even have it turned on. So, but that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up, and a good time to address that. So.
Thank you.
Thanks,
If
Kim.
it's
Appreciate
okay, I'd like to speak to that question as well.
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. So I think I'm going to say basically the same thing as Brista, but I have seen lots of QBO folks find the bank feed to be tremendously beneficial in terms of their recording their expenses. And I've heard frequently that it's really invaluable. And so then the next step, of course, is just making sure that they're managing their undeposited funds. And QuickBooks Online, at least, will automatically match any deposit you've recorded in QuickBooks Online with something on the bank feed. So then you just confirm that it's correct. And that really gives you an opportunity to kind of speed up that matching process and help avoid the duplication of revenue.
It's absolutely tremendous. The only thing you have to be careful is that everything's exported from Service Titan and it doesn't match up a deposit with an invoice. That's the only thing, but it's really helps me tremendously.
it. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate everyone's kind of input and experience using bank feeds or not so. So thank you. All right. So Brista, we can move into our next section on common tips and tricks.
Yeah, and JP, this may be more of your area of expertise, just as far as the common ones that you guys, you know, that you have on your side that you can think of. These ones here that I'll talk through are ones that I've run into. So, you know, there's, you know, probably a bunch that I left out, but JP, feel free to jump in on these ones and just talk to them a little bit more. So with your price book management and updates, we talked about the setup and how important that is. We also have the management piece of it. So the nice piece here is you have that little button highlighted there to turn it on into edit mode. And then you're able to edit things right there within that table rather, you know, or that section for the services or the materials. If we turn that on, then it allows you to edit items within that table there. The other option to update or manage your price book, if you have a larger set of items to update, you can also export your current price book, do the edits within QuickBooks, or sorry, within Excel, and then re-upload it, and it'll override any of the prior data for those particular items that you have. So if you have one mass cost update to do, for example, you can export that price book and update the cost. and then re-upload it and it'll override everything rather than having to update the cost for, 50 items or something. But that, if you have just a couple of items to take care of, that toggle button also is super helpful. And even with the columns that are displayed, you can change the columns that you want to see so that you can edit the proper columns if there's something there that you don't see in that moment, as far as it goes with the price book there. Then when we're exporting or editing something, when we export, we want to create the new batch. We want to batch what you have selected. So invoices, you batch all your invoices together, and then we export to QuickBooks. Or we batch all of our payments together, and then we export to QuickBooks. We talk a lot about the invoices and the payments that we're exporting. And those are the items that you'll see there within that accounting tab within Service Titan. So we're creating a batch. We're batching what we want to send over, and then we are posting and exporting those to QuickBooks. There is that little red message there where you bypass the export. Very few instances where that would be the case, where you want to bypass the export. It does clear them out of the queue if you're looking at what to export, but what we've talked about before, we want to get all of our records into QuickBooks so that we've got a good comparison and we've got a good set of financials with all the information that is within Service Titan. So that's a quick little overview with some images there of what to export as far as and how, and then as far as when. So whenever you want to work through your financials, I'm going to update my bank feeds, or, if you're in QuickBooks Online, or I'm going to update my bank account in QuickBooks Desktop. Make sure that this syncing is done before you go into your financial, or, you go into QuickBooks, because you want to make sure all the data is there to match up. So that's when, some people may like it done daily. Some people may want to wait until the end of the month to do all the syncing from Service Titan into QuickBooks and maintain everything else. That's completely up to you, and you, the owner, or you, the controller, or, whatever your position is there, and you want to make that decision. It's just, if you want to do your financials, then make sure you have all the data there, obviously. So that's when we do it weekly. We've done it. I've seen it done monthly. So it just really depends on the process and the approach you want to take to your updating your financial information within QuickBooks. And then when we post or we export items, we talked about that just a little bit in that refund process that JP touched on. We want to make sure that we add that adjustment invoice, so then a credit memo can be synced over. So we've done the exporting, we've done, the posting and the exporting, but we've got to make an adjustment. So you create that adjustment invoice that can then be available for you to export into QuickBooks. So then we've got that, we've got correct data in both spots. So we have that adjustment invoice. And then we have your dashboard. When you log in, you see this nice, pretty dashboard, and you have a lot of different modules on there that you can move around. And so with that dashboard, we can kind of change how you want to see things. And each of those would take a little bit of setup, and maybe it just takes a little bit of time to understand what's going on with each of those dashboards. But you have the ability there to move around and to see, if there's something else that you want to see on your dashboard when you log into Service Titan. You have the ability to edit those and change those around as you would prefer. And then when we talk about implementing Service Titan, so if you're wanting to make a change and start with Service Titan, you want to make sure, just like any sort of big process change that you're doing, you want to make sure that it's a very planned out event with your accounting team, and even with your office staff that's working within Service Titan. When do I sync? What do I sync? What, when we get an error, who's going to address that? And you want to make sure that event, whatever the timeline looks like, it is coordinated with all pieces involved and all teams involved with that sync. So just like any change, you'd want to make sure that all pieces are involved there, and all pieces have have the ability to make the change as it's needed. And don't assume that everybody knows proper bookkeeping procedures or knows how to use QuickBooks. You might want to be ready to just be ready for training. If we're only in ServiceTitan and we want to make the change to syncing into QuickBooks, we want to make sure that we have, the proper training available for that sync and how to manage it and how to set it up and get everything done properly. So if you want, if you want to, want to see if somebody else fits into that role of a bookkeeper, be ready to supply that training, and that way they're set up for success, as well as the person, but as well as your financials, they're all set up for success there. So I just want to make sure that with any implementation, especially as it's the ServiceTitan syncing into QuickBooks, we have the proper items in place and we have the proper people and we have the proper training, and it just is a good way to be ready for that implementation and just set everybody up for a good transition. And then if we just talk about some quick access to find invoices, jobs, payments, we've got to look into, payments and research what payment was applied to which job or invoice. There's that quick access feature there. There's a little magnifying glass. When you look at the top banner across your dashboard, there's a nice little magnifying glass there, and you can look up customers. You can look up, if you do have a discrepancy between one system and the other, this is a good way to look up, okay, I need to look up this customer, and then it'll list everything there. Or I just need to look up this particular invoice because something's off with that particular invoice. So it gives you some an easy way to quickly search for something. You got to have the numbers or the customer name to search for those types of things. But then once you get those records returned, you can navigate through other items as it relates to that record. So you look up an invoice, then we can navigate to the customer page or to the payments or all that. So it'll all kind of integrate there if you need to search for something quickly.
Excellent, Brista. So that's our last tips and tricks kind of slide here. So JP, I just wanted to give you the opportunity if there's anything that you, excuse me, you kind of thought of or might just want to bring up or speak to any of those. If not to put you on the spot, but if not, that's okay too. And then if there's any questions about any of those things that Brista went over before we transition.
I have nothing to add. Brista went over like some of the best tips and tricks.
Thanks.
Excellent. Excellent. Love to hear that. Well, we did have one question. It's not specifically about these tips and tricks, but it did come in, so I want to be sure to address it. Is there a way to get QuickBooks to recognize class or business unit on an item by item basis on an invoice instead of assigning just the business unit of the job to every line item on the invoice?
Within QuickBooks, yes, there is. If you have class tracking turned on in QuickBooks, there's a sub feature of that to be able to assign classes to each line item. So make sure that that is turned on within QuickBooks to allow that feature. Then it's not just the overall invoice, but it would then allow you to assign classes by each line item there within QuickBooks. Does that,
Excellent.
that answer? Yeah. Does that answer your question, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm not sure where to find that. Can you give more specific information as to where that's located?
Within you're on desktop?
Within, yeah, QuickBooks desktop, yes.
Within your preferences, there, and you look at the settings of the file itself, there should be a feature there for class tracking one, but then also making sure you have that ability to assign it by line. The other way that you can see it is within an invoice in QuickBooks. If it's already turned on, you would see your item, you have an invoice, you look at your item, and then over to the right, you should have the ability to assign a class to that particular item within that invoice in QuickBooks.
Okay, and it would pull that information on a line by line item from ServiceTitan?
as the item is set up. So each item can be set up with the business unit.
Yep.
And then when it's added to the invoice there, then it'll be assigned to the business unit as it pertains to the item. Service material, however you have it set up within Service Titan.
Yeah, I think I found the setting. It's a drop down under class in preferences.
Yeah.
Yep. Jennifer, I actually have it pulled up. If you'll stop sharing, I'll share my
Oh,
screen
sure.
real quick.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, JP.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yep, just where you were talking about, it's under edit and then preferences. So to get there, oops, you can't see yet. Okay, edit and then preferences, and then under accounting and company preferences and assign classes to, and you can select that there. The other place, if you want to see it, I assume you mean on a customer invoice.
Yes.
If you want to see it line by line, you just have to choose a template or edit a template so that you actually have that showing. So I just happen to have one that already has it, but if I was like on this one, I don't have my classes listed. If you want to edit your layout, you use the customized data layout, which is under formatting and then customized data layout. And then it'll give you the opportunity to, well, you have to make a copy. And then you look at columns and write down to class. We want to see on the screen and we want it to print if you print anything. Oh my gosh, holy cow. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you so much, JP.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions just in general about what we have gone over today? Leave that open for a second. And reshare my screen with our presentation. All right, well, Brista and JP, I don't see any questions. Again, feel free to just unmute or type it in the chat. And this is being recorded and we'll send it out so you can watch everything back. And if there's any questions that come up within that, we'll give you some information on how to contact us. So, but so how can out of the box technology help? At the beginning, I mentioned that we are anything and everything QuickBooks, and anything and everything that integrates or syncs or partners with QuickBooks to make it a better product. And so that's what Service Titan is as well. So we can be your partner in your bookkeeping, our relationship and our certifications with Service Titan. We can really help to train you on these things. Brista emphasized the importance of proper setup. We can come alongside you there as well to make sure that from the get-go, everything starts off cleanly and correctly. And we can be there as often as you need. So we can set it up and you can, maybe you're really handy with technology and with applications and you will be good to go. Or maybe you need us to check in once a month, once a week, once a quarter, whatever that might look like. We can come alongside you there with our team of experts. As I said, we're constantly learning and being certified and in communication with the folks at Service Titan to just make sure that we're fully apprised to what's going on, as well as with QuickBooks. So that's kind of where we are and where we can be with you. Brista or JP, did you have anything else to kind of add to that element of how we can be of service to our friends here on the call?
I think you got it.
All right, well, I will show one more beautiful graphic slide for questions. If there's anyone who has any further questions as we wrap up this morning. Again, we do appreciate you taking time out of your day to go through this information with us. JP, thank you so much for joining this presentation. Appreciate the knowledge and demos that you were able to share with everyone. I think that was really, really helpful. We do have a couple other resources that we'll be sending out as a follow-up to everyone here from Service Titan and from Out of the Box, just to kind of have, it's not to sell you on anything. It's not to like push anything, just for you to have, just a resource again that goes along with this presentation. So we do have a question that came in. Can we talk about late fees and how they affect the KPI on the dashboard?
Sure. JP, if you want to talk to that one as it relates to the dashboard, and how that all. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, nope, that was in regard to Jeff. So
Okay.
can we talk about late fees and how they affect the KPI on the dashboard? Will you tell me a little bit more about your question, Charlie? Which KPI on the dashboard are we talking about? Production revenue. Well, to be completely candid, I don't know right off the top of my head. I'd have to look that up. If you give me a second while we don't have any other questions. Yeah, if you give me a minute, I'll look it up. I'm so sorry, I don't know off the top of my head.
Thanks. Thanks so much, JP. Yeah, that's really what we're here for. All of us, both Brista and JP and just the team here. If I know there's a lot of maybe specific questions to your business, again, I'll share our contact information that you can just reach out, maybe a phone call, kind of a one-on-one chat too, sometimes helps to really dive into specifically what you're looking for. But we are here, like I said, if there are questions or you want to know how to turn something on or turn something off, or just take a look and see, I have it already, but is it set up right? Maybe it's been a while since you've taken a look at your setup, whether it's in Service Titan with your QuickBooks, the QuickBooks software that you're on. Are you in the right software for what you're doing? Businesses evolve, you've grown, you've changed, things have, gone differently since 2020 or whatnot. Always a good time to just take a look at how everything is working, how everything is set up, and make sure that it's as efficient and accurate as possible. And yeah, I don't think I see any other questions. So
I
JP
did
will
have one about the business units. I wasn't sure if anybody saw that. If you were to change or update your business units, do you have to redo those web connectors? I used to use Service Titan. I cannot remember that.
I would just, for my own peace of mind, whether or not you do, I would just go back and double check it just to make sure that everything, because that change in the name within Service Titan may not affect the mapping on the web connectors, but I would just go back into that setup, the integrations section of Service Titan, just to do a quick check on it. Because it would sync over when you do that sync, it'll pick it up. But
So if it doesn't work, like your sync won't work, you'll see an error or something like that.
correct.
Okay,
Correct.
great. Thank
Correct.
you so much.
Yep.
So for QuickBooks Desktop, anything you change in Service Titan, as long as you've got it mapped in the web connector, will pass down to QuickBooks Desktop. You could change your business unit name from Electrical Install to Flying Spaghetti Monster. And when you exported something with that on it, you would then see Flying Spaghetti Monster in your QuickBooks Desktop. In your QuickBooks Online, that one gets quite fussy. And I would, like Brista was saying, definitely double check that you have everything exactly how you want it, and that your mapping is set up there, because that one can get messy really quick.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I don't see any other questions. I'm just gonna put up our contact information here for Out of the Box Technology. And like I said, we've really have a great relationship with Service Titan. So if you call us and you've got some specific questions, not only is Brista a certified accountant with Service Titan, but we do have that direct connection right to the folks over there. And so we would be happy to help you out. If you're not using Service Titan and you're interested in exploring it, then I would love to have that conversation with you as well to see how we can get you all set up and started. So on behalf of the team here at Out of the Box and Service Titan, thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate the opportunity from Service Nation Alliance for allowing us to engage with you all today. I know we'll be back in the summer to do another session surrounding QuickBooks and another topic. So we're excited for that. Hope you can join us. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Hope everyone has a wonderful week.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, very helpful.